The agenda was issued last Tuesday, 16th of February 2021. This meeting is being held remotely and the public are excluded. This is the 6th time that the Falkirk Council has met remotely. The meeting is being recorded and live streamed. A video recording will be posted online on the Council's YouTube channel shortly after the meeting. If members wish to speak, they should physically raise their hand or indicate using the chat facility. Members should otherwise refrain from using the chat facility if they don't want to speak. And I'm advising you that everybody that wants to speak will have an opportunity before closing the debate. Remember that because of the numbers, will be 2 to 3 screens featuring members and officers. There will be an opportunity during the meeting, if appropriate, for a comfort break. I will now ask Mr. Moody to take the sederin. Thank you, Mr. Moody.
Thank you, Provost. Provost Buchanan.
Present.
Deputy Provost Ritchie. I can see Deputy Provost Ritchie, so present. Councillor Aitchison.
Yeah.
Councillor Alexander.
Present.
Councillor Balfour.
Present.
Councillor Binney.
Present.
Councillor Bissett.
Present.
Councillor Black.
Present.
Councillor Blackwood.
Present.
Councillor Bowes.
Present.
Councillor Coleman.
Present.
Councillor Colley.
Present.
Councillor Coombs.
Here.
Councillor Flynn.
Present.
Councillor Garner.
Yeah.
Councillor Goldie.
Assume.
Councillor Grant.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Hughes.
Present.
Councillor Kerr.
Yeah.
Councillor McHugh. Present. Councillor McCluckie.
Here.
Councillor Meiklejohn.
Present.
Councillor Monroe.
Present.
Councillor Murtagh.
And shot.
Councillor Nicholl.
Present.
Councillor Nimmo.
Present.
Councillor Patrick.
Present.
Councillor Reid.
Present.
And Councillor Spears.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, that takes us now to declaration of interest. And just for clarity, I will read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have we any declarations of interest at this time? Okay, thank you for that. That takes us to item 3 on your agenda. 2019-20 annual accounts and the annual audit report to members and the Controller of Audit. The report will be given by Mr. Brian Smale. It's pages 2 to 187. After Mr. Smale has finished, then will directly be followed by the auditors, Stephen Reid and Grace Scanlon. Thank you very much, Mr. Smale.
Thank you, Provost, and good morning. As you say, I'll speak to the cover report, which fronts 2 detailed documents. The accounts alone are something over 100 pages, and of course we have the auditor's report dealing with those. And as you've said, after I've spoken, there'll be an opportunity for Council to hear directly from EY, our auditors, on their report. This flows from compliance with due process insofar as the accounts have already been considered by the Audit Committee on the 9th of November, and that afforded opportunity for that committee to review and scrutinise the accounts before them. If I could just draw your attention to paragraph 3.2, where it notes that following that committee, the auditors had determined that they felt further work was required with respect to alleged procurement anomalies, and that's essentially the reason why this stage of the process is coming before you later than it normally would do. I'll make further reference to that point as I go through the report. The report's essentially with two primary components. The first one, set out in section 4.1, is the actual audit of the financial statements. And you can see in that relatively short section that there was really only two adjustments that are highlighted at para 4.1.3. And I won't go on those. The second part relates to the wider scope work that relates to best value, and that in turn has four strands which are clearly set out in the summary report, and I'll briefly run through the key elements perhaps worthy of drawing out from each of those. So the first one relates to financial sustainability, and I think the main point the auditors want to bring out there is the challenge that the council faces over the medium term, and this is common with every other council in meeting the projected budget gaps that they have. And of course, that's compounded on the one hand by the backcloth of the number of years where savings have had to be found, and of course we have the particular context of COVID-19, which has impacted both the current financial year and will have implications going forward. The next element is financial management, and as you can see at para 4.2.3 in the opening sentence there, the auditors do note that the council continues to demonstrate financial control and that financial reporting is clear and consistent throughout the financial year. They do make the point about thinking it helpful if the savings as they are tracked, or the delivery of the savings as they're tracked in the year, helpful to differentiate the council of the future savings from other savings. We currently provide in the regular monitoring reports to the executive progress on delivery of savings, and we will be able to deal with the particular request of splitting that in future reports. There's reference, as you'll see at 4.2, to the management of the capital programme, and members on the executive will know that we've undertaken a review during the course of the current year with the purpose of trying to improve the management of slippage. I think it's just a hard reality that slippage and capital go together. There are always reasons, and they're varied. It could be everything from weather, which is clearly, certainly in recent weeks, topical. It can be difficulties with utilities, and there can be planning issues that emerge. So I think it's a balance between accepting those things happen in the real world and accepting that, managing the programme as best as can be done to ensure timeous delivery and compliant with the allocated sums. Your attention to the content of para 4.2.5 and picking up on my earlier comments on the whistleblowing allegations. These were made, as will be evident, by a whistleblower, and our whistleblowing policy and framework provide for such representations to be made. An assessment is made as to the substance of what's been alleged, and flowing from that, where deemed necessary, an investigation will be conducted. In this case, that's what happened, and the conclusions of that investigation were passed across to management, who then conducted, consistent with due process, further work to determine the substance of those allegations and the finding of the fraud review. That work was undertaken by specialist and independent council staff, and the outcome of that was that no evidence of fraud was discovered. There were, as inevitably happens with such investigations, areas where it was felt procedures could be tightened up, and that's a positive outcome, and those changes will be implemented. At that point, the auditors, as is their right, determined that they felt they would like to undertake further work to gain comfort that things were, in their eyes, as they should be. And they duly undertook, following the processes and procedures, further work. And that essentially reached the same conclusion as the council's own investigation and management review had, namely that no evidence of fraud had been discovered, but yes, there was scope to tighten up procedures to better secure things going forward. And a number of recommendations flowed from that. And you can see in the bullets at para 425 the essence of those. So that's really where that sits, and the recommended changes will be implemented and tighten things going forward. Third strand to the best value section relates to governance and transparency. And again, if I draw your attention to the opening sentence at para 427, where it was noted that key features of good governance are in place and operating effectively. And moreover, satisfaction with the way matters have been managed during the period of the pandemic. They do note, as they've done in previous years at para 428, the issue of conflict of interest in relation to the Falkirk Stadium. In terms of this, I can advise members that a report will shortly be coming before them that will serve to wrap up the position with the stadium. The reason it's been deferred was because of the recent decision taken by council to bring the trust back in. So the report just needs to reflect that development. So all issues are dealt with in the round, and the result of the changes that will be recommended by that report will resolve inherently the issue of conflict of interest, and that will be, there will be no need, one would expect, for comments by the auditor in future. Just to conclude that section, and aligning with the earlier comments on the review of the fraud allegations, under this section it's noted that the existing whistleblowing policy and anti-fraud and corruption strategy will be reviewed just to make sure it aligns with best practice. And also there's the important matter of ensuring that investigations or the outcome of those investigations are reported to the Audit Committee, and indeed that will be the case with the one we've just been talking about at the next meeting of the Audit Committee. And the final section relates to value for money. And again, I think Council can draw comfort from the comments at para 4210 there. The arrangements for performance monitoring have continued through the current COVID crisis, and Council services perform well against benchmark comparators. There is scope to improve public performance reporting, and that will be taken on board. So with that relatively quick run through of the overview of the accounts and the auditor's report, I'll draw your attention to the recommendations at the front of the report. But as we said at the outset, before turning to these, Council will want to hear directly from the auditors EY themselves. So at that point, Provost, I'll stop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's an opportunity now for Stephen Reid and Grace Scanlon from our external auditors, Ernst & Young, to give an overview of each of the appended reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Provost.
Stephen? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll kick off, Provost. Thank you and good morning. Provost, in the context of what Brian has just said, I have a few comments to add to it, but clearly won't repeat those areas. So the purpose of the external audit annual report is to support council members and the Accounts Commission, and specifically council members, in discharging your scrutiny responsibilities. As Brian touched on, this annual audit report was considered by the Council's Audit Committee on the 9th of November. And at that point, we highlighted an outstanding area in relation to whistleblowing allegations, which at that time we had become aware of through a press article in October. Following inquiries with management, we received details of the Council's investigation on the 24th of November, and then commenced a process of considering the impact of the report through our internal processes, and assessed that we did have to undertake additional audit procedures to allow us to conclude on the audit. Given the fact that this report and the outcome of the audit was largely considered at the Audit Committee, Provost, together with the very full summary which Brian has provided, I want to focus on the outcome of the additional procedures and the work in response to the whistleblowing allegations. As Brian alluded to, we did engage our forensic specialist team to support us as the audit team, and the additional work was completed through the period December to February. As we outline on page 29 of the report, we did find a number of weaknesses in key internal controls, including segregation of duties and the financial monitoring of contracts. And those did mirror a number of the findings which the council officers also identified. We also found that the corporate fraud team and fact-finding reports didn't fully align, and there were some gaps identified between the allegations and the counter-fraud team report and the ultimate conclusions in the fact-finding report. And it was as a result of that that we undertook more extensive additional procedures to seek to bridge those gaps. We have made recommendations about how the Council should investigate and report on similar cases in the future, including importantly on how the Audit Committee is kept informed of whistleblowing activity and any fraud investigations. The additional work that we have undertaken has allowed and does allow me to conclude that there was no direct evidence of collusion, and that any sums involved would mean that there was no risk of material misstatement to the 2019-20 financial statements. On that basis, I have satisfied myself that we can finalise our work on the financial statements, but as we do outline in the report, we will undertake additional targeted testing on procurement as part of our work in the 2021 financial year, and we will also follow up the recommendations which are included within this report to ensure that we're content that those have been addressed satisfactorily by officers. Our forensics team has also committed to support management in undertaking their own lessons learned exercise, and we'll share the detail and good practice as part of that process. So in summary, Provost, I can confirm that I intend to issue an unqualified opinion on the financial statements. And as Brian indicated within the report, I've also concluded in respect of each area of the wider scope dimension of public audit. So with those comments, very happy to pause there.
Okay, thank you. Is your colleague want to come in on this? Is she available this morning?
Yeah, Grace is on the call, Provost, but she doesn't have anything to add at this.
To add to that. Okay, yeah. There'll be an opportunity once the leader and the two leaders of the groups for any questions coming back to either Mr. Smale or yourself. Okay, thank you. Okay, then I'll go straight down to the leader, Councillor Meikle-John. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. I think I want to first start and take the opportunity to thank the external auditors, Stephen and Grace at Ernst & Young, for the work they've done in producing the annual report and the audit report and the annual accounts for members to consider today, and to Mr. Smale and his finance team and those within the wider council who have contributed to putting together the annual report. It is a significant piece of work. Made all the more challenging, including that for our external audit team with staff having to work remotely. There's a lot of information which has been detailed in a user-friendly way as possible with such a report that's before us. And the additional work that has been done in more recent times is very welcome. And I know to the council, and has supported the council through that process. As has been said, the accounts themselves have already undergone the scrutiny at the Audit Committee in November, and there was significant questioning by members at that time. Presentation to Council was delayed to allow external auditors to carry out further in-depth pieces of work around our procurement practice and process as a result of the whistleblowing investigation to the alleged fraud. Assurance had been given following the Council's own investigation that the outcome not having identified any evidence of fraud, but a number of areas where processes could be strengthened. Further work then carried out by our external auditors has provided further assurance and supported the outcome of the Council's own investigation on areas for improvement and make up part of the recommendations and the response in the Management Action Plan, one of which is a regular update on fraud matters to be reported to the Audit Committee, which I think members will welcome. It is noted that overall we do have an unqualified audit certificate again, which is heartening and puts the Council in a good position going forward. And turning to page 125, it sets the annual audit report out as a red, amber, green rating for 4 best value characteristics. First of which is financial stability, which, like other councils, highlights the challenges for the future and the need to plan ahead. Financial management needs to be sharper to demonstrate and quantify our transformational savings and robust management of our capital programme, as well as improvements already highlighted around procurement. Having recognised areas for improvement, we've already engaged some external assistance around the Council of the Future programme to be able to have clarity and help planning for the future around identifying those transformational savings, and more robust monitoring of our capital programme has been put in place and continues to be managed in order to reduce the elements of slippage. Governance and transparency, the auditors have acknowledged the role and the work of elected members and are satisfied that members continue to have access to sufficient information to fulfil their role, particularly during the COVID pandemic, which has been a fast changing environment for all of us, and has been no mean feat in being able to keep members up to date. Value for money is very critical, and identified where the improvements need to be made in public reporting. And again, further work is underway to address this. We now look forward to our impending best value review, which will take place a bit later this year. The first council to undergo a best value review post-COVID. We need to make sure that we highlight what has worked well and what has been achieved, as well as the lessons learned. Council and our communities have responded magnificently to COVID. It's important that we collectively tell the story to do justice to the work of our employees, our volunteers, our community partners have put in over the last 12 months, and take that learning and help us set the vision for the future. I want to emphasise the importance of a good best value report for the council and for our communities, particularly for our economic recovery. It will give confidence to investors and to our citizens that we can deliver good quality value for money services and attract inward investment, bringing jobs to the area and boosting our local economy. Our communities deserve to have a well-run and stable council to support them. In September, we agreed 3 new priorities: communities, enterprise and innovation. We have a good story to tell under each of those priorities as we respond and recover from COVID. Again, I thank the auditors for the report and the work that they've done, and to the teams for pulling us together, and look forward to working further with them to improve our financial reporting and stability going forward. Thank you, Provost.
So you moving the recommendation then? Thank you.
Sorry, yes, Provost, I'm moving the recommendation to accept the report.
Fine, I'll go to Councillor Bowes. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost. Can I repeat the Leader of the Council's thanks to Ernst Young for their work on this report. On the financial statements, I'm pleased to say that the unaudited accounts came before Audit Committee in August 2020, the audited accounts in November of the same year, with ultimately no adjustments being required, although, as has already been said, further work on another section of the report was required. Ernst Young have certified the accounts as free from qualification, with the only understandable adjustment being the revaluation of council houses. On financial stability, the £29 million budget gap over the next 3 years is noted, and what's an ongoing uncertainty in this terrible pandemic. The ever-present review of the medium-term financial plan will also be very important in these unprecedented times. In financial management, the Council has continued, as has been said, to demonstrate good, clear and consistent financial control and reporting throughout the year. And as ever, I would like to thank Mr Smale and his team for the hard work that they carry out on this. Slippage in the capital programme will be one of the biggest challenges in the coming year, but improvements in monitoring and ownership of capital programmes has been reported many times at Council and to the Executive. However, the challenge in the current situation, on top of the ones that Brian has mentioned, is that there will be a delay in result of catch-up projects not being processed last year during the pandemic. I note the auditor's agreement with the management response on the improvement to the corporate fraud and procurement processes. On governance and transparency, I think it's very important that Ernst Young have commented the key features of good governance are in place and operating effectively. I welcome Brian's statement on the report on the long-running saga, which is the Falkirk Stadium, and the review of the whistleblowing and anti-fraud corruption strategy. In value for money, the Ernst Young reports confirms that during the pandemic, performance monitoring has continued and that services and therefore our employees have performed well against national comparators. And I personally would like to thank them for that in what is, again, has been a really tough year. In conclusion, the essence of good financial planning is a robust financial framework to ensure that resources are targeted at the Council's outcomes. This, however, is a living entity and relies on constant monitoring and good governance. Rather than me commenting on that, I would refer you to pages 125 and 132 of the Ernst Young report for conclusions and audit opinions, and I'm happy to second the Leader of the Council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Bowes. I'll go straight now to the opposition leaders. First one, Councillor Robert Bissett. Councillor Bissett.
Thanks, Provost. I would as well like to thank Ernst Young and for his comprehensive report for the 1920 accounts and the audit of it. Clearly, and I'd like to thank Mr. Smale and his team who do great work behind the scenes to get things delivered. And also like to thank the audit committee for the work they did on this. Clearly, the purpose of this is to have openness and transparency, since we're a public body, and to identify any strengths and weaknesses that there may be. And like any organisation, an organisation evolves and develops and grows and changes. And clearly, it's the purpose of this report is to highlight where we can change and improve and become better. So I welcome that. And as far as a health check goes, it's a pretty good health check overall, really. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions and make observations. Certainly on the stadium company, I was glad to hear from Mr. Smale that in order to prevent any conflict of interest, that the report is coming forward to try and resolve that. And the trust coming back in-house is probably precipitated that. Whistleblowing policy, well, I think a comment I'd like to make on that is that I think going forward, any issues like that, councillors need to be more aware of it, at least have a note of it before it hits the local press, and then you get bombarded with emails about what's going on. So if you've got a heads up on it, I think it would, I'm not saying you need to know a great level of detail, but any particular issue like that needs to be sort of in the hands of a councillor, just because we're the public face out there and we get the email. So I think a wee heads up on that would help. I just wanted to mention the bit about the Council of the Future. We this year we were asked to put £1 million into the Council of the Future Change Fund, and I've always had reservations about that. From the point of view, I'm not saying I disagree with it, but certainly I've asked in the past, you know, we need, what are all the projects, what are the costs and benefits? So some feedback on the savings, and certainly never really felt we've had that. And I was glad to see that the auditor said on page 168, there is no specific reporting that distinguishes transformation savings to the Council of the Future, and the recommendations that the Council should ensure that progress against the Council of the Future Transformation Programme is reported to allow specific scrutiny of the savings and benefits delivered by the programme. The specific Council of the Future savings are identified in the Futures report. So I welcome that constructive feedback from the auditors. I think it's certainly a change that needs to happen. And a question I'd just like to pose to Mr. Laurie and to the auditors. The first one for Mr. Laurie and the second one for auditors. The first one is, I'd like to ask Mr. Laurie, how important is it that Falkirk Council achieves its transformational Council of the Future strategy, and does he agree with auditors' comments? And the question for the auditors, Provost, is, from your experience of working with other councils, what are the things that Falkirk Council can learn to help us become better? Thank you, Provost. That's all I've got, because I think it's a comprehensive report and it's welcome. Thank you.
Okay, then we'll take your first question, Mr. Laurie.
Yes, thank you, Provost, and good morning, everybody. In terms of how important the Council of the Future strategy is to the Council, I would say it's of fundamental importance, and really there's two main reasons for that. One is that we need to transform and improve services to meet the needs of our communities, and particularly in the light of COVID-19. We know about the impact of that in terms of poverty and well-being and the economy, and we need to adapt and respond to that. And both the corporate plan and the Council of the Future Business Plan, which the Council approved in September of last year, set out our proposed approach to that. And I suppose the other aspect, and maybe the overwhelming aspect, is we know that the Council faces very significant financial challenges in future years, and the projections demonstrate that. And really, ultimately, I feel as a Council we have a stark choice. We can either transform the business under the themes of communities and enterprise and innovation, and taking innovative approaches to services that enable us to both preserve and enhance services whilst making significant savings. And we know that is doable, and indeed we know that has been done elsewhere, because the alternative to that is simply making service cuts in order to bridge the budget gap. And I don't think anyone in this chamber, this digital chamber, would want to do other than maximise the transformational savings which preserve and enhance services, rather than making service cuts. So I think it's fundamental from that point of view. And I think our approach to that and our progress in relation to that, our determination to transform and improve the business will be fundamental to the outcome that this Council has in relation to the forthcoming Best Value Review. And Councillor Bissett, in relation to the second part of your question, which is whether I agree with the auditor's comments in relation to that, the answer to that is straightforward. The answer is yes.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll now ask Mr. Reid to come in relation to the second question given by Councillor Bissett.
Thank you, Provost, and thank you for the question, Councillor Bissett. And actually, in response to the question, I want to build on the Chief Executive's response, and your question was, what can the Council do to become better? I think, and I want to focus the response around the financial sustainability. I think officers and members have done well to understand the extent of the financial gap, you know, in over the future period, and to keep on top of how that changes given the changing pressures and not least the impact of COVID-19 on service users and society. But there is a responsibility very clearly on all members, irrespective of political party or allegiance, to achieve best value. And a key focus of the Best Value Review in 2021 has been alluded to, is how well the Council is achieving that. And a key way to achieve that is that long-term financial planning and delivery of an agreement of the plans to deliver the transformation agenda, which the Chief Executive outlined. That is going to be absolutely fundamental to the success of the Council, and to move from a more short-term horizon to a more medium and long-term horizon, because by their very necessity, the transformational change will require investment, but also will take some time to deliver, to secure the improvement in services and the closing of the financial gap. So the key area I would focus on in specific response to your question, Councillor, is for all members to work together to deliver and take the difficult decisions that will be necessary to secure the long-term plans and financial sustainability of the Council through the corporate plan and the transformation programme, which the Chief Executive referred to.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reid. Now go to Councillor Kerr. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you, Provost. Like the Leader of the Council, Councillor Bowes and Councillor Bissett, I'd like to thank Brian and Danny Kearney and their teams for the work they've done on the report. Also to Stephen and Grace from Ernest Young on completing this audit. Like in the last few years, Provost, has been a challenging time, and more so the last year. And highlighted in the areas in the report: approach to best value, financial sustainability, financial management, governance and transparency, and value for money will hopefully tighten up all aspects of our business. We appreciate the recommendations of the auditors Ernest and Young, and hopefully these will have a positive impact going forward. The 4 areas highlighted in page 125, the wider scope and base value, with financial stability being red, and the other 3 areas, financial management, governance and transparency, and value for money, all being amber. These are all challenges, Provost, but our aim must be to get these to green. It is important that everyone remembers that this money is public money, and that it is our responsibility on behalf of the people of Falkirk that they get value for money. And I'm glad that the conclusion came to a satisfactory conclusion, Provost. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your input, sir. Well, just to clarify where we are, we had the motion moved and seconded to agree the recommendation contained within the report. I can open up for debate. Has anybody got any questions to ask? Either Mr. Smale or Councillor Nimmo, when you come. Thank you.
Thanks, Provost. It's just a question that's already been touched on already, and it's in relation to the revaluation of the council house stock. The district valuer has obviously increased the value of our housing stock by a large amount, £85 million. And I take it from the report that this is based on a 5-year period, and that averages out something like £17 million a year of an increase. Now, there's nothing in the assurance statements to back this up, although it is detailed in the annual report on page 136. I was just wondering why this hasn't been picked up before as an issue and dealt with prior to this. Thanks, Provost.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Ask a question. Mr. Smale, would you like to come in on this?
Yes, thanks, Provost. The issue of valuation is one where we have regular dialogue and debate with our auditors, trying to navigate a way forward and trying to adhere to and comply with their preferred position, but on the other hand, balancing that with the recognition that valuation is a specialist area, and either you have the resources in-house, and we're very thin on resources in-house, or you have to go outside and pay, whether it be the DV or a commercial firm to do that, and that obviously costs public money, which we're very sensitive about and very wary about. We usually manage with discussion with the auditor to get to a mutually agreeable position. In terms of the comment from Councillor Nimmo on the it is a big figure, but if you think we've got something like 40,000 council houses, and multiply that by a typical value, and the overall stock gets you to a very large figure. So the base figure we're talking about here is very substantial. Provost, it may well be that, supplementing my comments, Stephen or Grace may want to come in and give their own take on what I've said, and indeed their own response to the question posed by Councillor Nimmo. Thanks, Provost.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Smale. Mr. Reid, would you like to come in on that point?
Thank you, Provost. Just to supplement Mr. Smale's comment, So the basis on which the council prepares its financial statements require that all the fixed assets are subject to formal valuation on a 5-yearly cycle, and that programme is planned and laid out. In the intervening years, there is a responsibility on the council to ensure that any assets that are not subject to formal valuation haven't moved in value in a material way. Now, the valuation of the council houses was a scheduled revaluation exercise for 2021. So for this financial year we're in, and in discussions with officers, we agreed that they would bring forward the information for that valuation exercise because it was such a significant cohort of the council's fixed assets, and that did identify the large increase in value. And for a number of reasons, we worked with the valuers and also with officers and challenged them to understand whether it was appropriate for the value to be reflected within the 1920 financial year, or as Councillor alludes to, whether there was a material misstatement in prior years. Given the developments, then we were content that it was appropriate to that this was a 1920. So the very fact that we had encouraged officers to advance the valuation in 2021 was a positive thing, because it did prevent a misstatement of 1920, which we would have identified in 2021. One of the recommendations, and as Mr. Smale says, we have ongoing dialogue, is the frequency and the robustness of the council's approach to valuation of property, plant and equipment of fixed assets in the intervening years between the formal revaluation. And we have made some comment in the report that that's an area that officers do need to keep under review to minimise the risk posed by big movements which are attributable to previous years.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reid. Quite happy there, Councillor Nimmo, with the explanations.
Yeah, that's fine, Provost. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, just to clarify again, Councillor Flynn, question?
Yep, two questions. Thank you, Provost. Two questions. With regard to page 155 and the fifth paragraph down, it refers to Falkirk Community Trust. I just would like clarification on 2 points. The first one is, it said the projected deficit the council have been asked to meet is now 1.38 million. Now, should that read as 1.38 million it was then, i.e. September 20, or has the figure been changed? Because as I understand it, the deficit is likely to be greater. And my second question, which probably nobody will be able to answer today, it references 80% of the staff being furloughed. Now, it doesn't mention over what time period, but that would suggest to me that approximately 120 staff were or are working, and I've no particular evidence myself of where they were working, so perhaps that's a question, the second one, that might go back to Falkirk Community Trust to answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smale, you want to come in here?
Thanks, Provost. The position with the Trust in terms of its deficit, something of a moving target with respect to the current financial year, and obviously the interplay with the extent buildings are open or not, as the case may be, the extent to which furlough has been able to be harnessed. The position, I think, has in the projected position for the current financial year in terms of the deficit. And of course, members may recall in the January report on the Trust business plan, updated information was given on the projected deficit for the forthcoming financial year. And in terms of the second question, it interplays, I think, to some degree with what I've already said in terms of the ability of the Trust, unlike the Council, to be able to access furlough support, which has greatly helped manage the deficit position So hopefully that, at least in some part, addresses the two questions that have been asked.
Thank you, Mr. Snell. Okay, we'll go to Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Provost. I have a question regarding page 156, value for money. On this, it indicates that due to COVID, there were only 3 scrutiny committees or a scrutiny meeting only once, where there should have been 2 for place, people and partnership. And it also says that it would be useful to have an annual performance report that draws together the performance of the council as a whole. And I just wondered whether there were plans in place to increase the level of scrutiny and to provide a performance report that brings everything together as is suggested in this report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Going to bring Mr. Moody in at the beginning. Thank you, Mr. Moody.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I think it is a correct observation for both the report and Councillor Munro to make that there was a gap in scrutiny activity immediately after the lockdown period during the COVID incident. But I think it's fair to say that committees are now back up and running. Scrutiny activity has been taking place. A scrutiny panel has met and reported during the period. So I think we're back in a better position than we were after the initial lockdown in March last year. In relation to the position on performance, I don't know if there's maybe something that Mr. Ritchie could add at that point in relation to proposals in relation to performance reporting.
Mr. Ritchie, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Provost. So just to pick up on Councillor Munro's second point, yes, the intention is to report to Scrutiny Committee on a review of where we've got to on the 3 priorities on our new corporate plan, and that will include an update on where we are on performance as well. So that should be coming to Scrutiny Committee either, well, it's not this time round it's innovation, so with the Scrutiny Committee after that. So that's perhaps June, I think, when you could expect that report.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, is there any other questions, or can we agree the report?
Agreed.
I think Councillor Reid, excuse me, I think Councillor Reid wanted in there. Councillor Reid.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I've got 1 or 2 questions. I'll keep them very brief, though.
Yep.
The first question regards page 12. That's page 12 of the council papers rather than page 12 of the document. The Falkirk facts. And the one that leaps out there is 23% of all children in Falkirk are estimated to be living in poverty. Now, we're about halfway up the league table in Scotland. Scotland's about halfway up the table internationally, with better statistics than the rest of the UK, generally speaking. But it's still a very high figure. Now, I think our local Children's Commission has a task group dealing with this, but it's something we very seldom see before committee. And it's one of the most important aspects of our life. Could I ask that regular reports be provided, I would assume, to the Children's Committee on the work of the task group in dealing with this serious problem? Would that be possible?
We'll get you an answer. Mr. Naylor there.
Yes, Councillor Reid is correct in that there's, as part of the wider community planning function, the Children's Commission does have a group that is actively working on the issue of child poverty, and I would be happy to prepare a report to come to a future meeting of the Education, Children and Young People Committee on that ongoing work.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sure other members are in agreement on that one. One of the references in the audit report was the use of projections, estimates. Could I ask Mr. Smale about page 47? And that was the estimate of extra rate collection, which I think was about 180,000, 172,000 last year. Did that materialise?
Mr. Smale? Yep.
It's not a definitive answer I can give off the top of my head. If Councillor Reid's happy, I'll check it out and come back with an authoritative answer after the meeting.
Yes.
Thank you.
I should apologise to Mr. Smale. I had intended to pass on the questions last night, but got overtaken by other events, which I won't go into. FCSL has been referred to with the report coming. We are now due to have 2 council meetings in March. Will the report come to one of those 2 meetings?
Brian?
Provost, I wonder if I could refer that question to the Acting Director of Development Services, who is a major player in pulling that report together, and would be able to give a more accurate position as to how close the report is ready to completion, and accordingly which might be best place to be submitted to.
Okay, thank you.
Happy to come in on that one, Provost, and it had been intended to bring the report to the executive. It wasn't intended that it would go to a council meeting. The work relating to it was to take on board the work that has been agreed following the decision on the council headquarters and the review of the back office, and needs some work to determine the apportioning of space within the building so that we can develop the financial profiles that will be used to manage the building. That's where the decision relating to the trust involves a level of uncertainty. So we do need to do a bit more work on that. And therefore, I think March may be challenging to get the reports brought forward. I think we would be more likely looking at executive in April for a report of that type.
Thank you, Mr. Reid. Councillor Reid?
Yes, thank you, Provost. There's been reference to the Council of the Future and to the fact that are not too clear when it comes to the consideration of the budget. Would it not be possible to include references in the RAG sheet? I think because I'm on the board of the COTF, I can identify more easily the savings that are coming from that source, but for other members it may be more difficult. So
Yep.
not a simple reference in the RAG sheets to that.
That's a good point. Mr. Smale again. Thank you, Mr. Smale.
Yeah, I mean, the forthcoming budget papers will endeavour to address those points in terms of clearly differentiating Council of the Future savings options that are being put forward. So that matters in hand.
Okay.
Going back to the reference to the deficit and the community trust, presumably it would have, had it been in house, it would have been £1 million higher deficit. Is that not the case?
Yes, once the rates rule benefit is lost, which is worth about £1 million, then that would have had to be picked up, and that's obviously something that for future projections we we will need to build in, but it doesn't take effect in practice to the 22-23 financial year.
Yeah. I think that's a difficulty of looking at the audit report. It's a year out of date, basically. So we're looking at the past, the present, the future, all at the same time. One fly in the ointment, page 96. I bring up this point ad nauseum, but so I don't apologise for bringing it up again. The Temperance Party Trust. Now, Councillor Grant and Murta are very hard-working, able councillors, but they do not represent Falkirk Borough, which is a prerequisite of membership as a trustee of the trust. Now, that was due to be addressed, but has not been addressed yet. I'm just a bit worried that if the trust is not constituted properly, any transactions conducted may be judged to be improper as well.
Okay, thank you. I think Mr. Moody's going to come in on this one.
Yes, thank you, Provost. Councillor Reid is correct that it is an issue which he has raised before and which is being looked into. It's something I think we're likely to come back to you with some proposals on relatively soon. I think potentially at the next ordinary meeting of council, and if not more likely the one following that. But I think on the final point that Councillor Reid makes about the validity of any transactions carried out by the trust, my assessment would be that the appointment of the current trustees as trustees would not have that impact, and that any transactions would be valid.
I don't want to compound Mr. Moody's problems, but there's also reference in the trust to the beneficiaries being people from the parish of Falkirk. But I'm sure he's picked that one up as well.
I think we're alive to all of these issues that Councillor Reid has helpfully raised, Provost.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Provost. That's me finished.
Okay, thank you very much for your input, Councillor. If there's no other questions, can we agree the report? Agreed the report?
Agreed.
Thank you. Before you go, just going to get Mr. Moody to clarify the position for the next two meetings, just in case that members are unaware that there have been changes. Mr. Moody?
Yes, thank you, Provost. And just to confirm that Council will meet again next week on the 3rd of March. And the purpose of that meeting will be to consider the Council's council tax for the forthcoming financial year. And that will be followed by a further meeting on the 11th of March, which will allow the Council to fix the wider budget of the Council beyond the mere fixing of the council tax. And the purpose of that was to allow councillors the fullest information available following the agreement of the Scottish Government budget before fixing the council budget.
Okay. Thank you very much. And that concludes the meeting.